Ethan Cole had 30 seconds before the storm buried everything when a German shepherd slammed into him out of nowhere, teeth gripping his sleeve, dragging him toward a patch of snow that didn't feel right. Then the dog collapsed, bleeding, barely breathing, and Ethan froze because he knew that look, that training, that loyalty. It wasn't random. This was a military canine, and as he carried the dog back through blinding wind, the animal kept lifting its head, staring toward the forest like something was still out there, waiting, calling. And just before losing consciousness, the dog let out a low, urgent growl, not at danger, but at something hidden beneath the ice that Ethan hadn't seen yet. Sometimes, the ones who are meant to save us find us first. The wind howled across the mountains like a voice that had forgotten how to be human, sharp and endless, slicing through layers of snow that swallowed the world whole as Ethan Cole pulled his coat tighter and kept moving, boots sinking nearly a foot into the frozen ground with every step, the cold biting through fabric and memory alike. And for a moment he wondered if silence had finally caught up to him out here, miles from anything that still remembered his name. But then it came, not a sound. At first, not something he could hear, but something he felt, a sudden pull at the edge of his awareness, the kind that had once kept him alive in places far from snow and far from peace. And before he could turn, a force slammed into his side, knocking the breath from his chest as a German shepherd burst through the white blur, jaws gripping his sleeve, not aggressive, not wild, but urgent, deliberate. The dog's amber eyes locked onto his with a focus that cut through the storm itself, and, without a word, without hesitation, the animal pulled, dragging him step by step toward a patch of snow that looked no different from the rest, yet somehow felt heavier, as if the ground beneath it held a secret too long buried. Ethan stumbled, heart pounding now, instincts waking up like old soldiers rising from sleep, and then the dog stopped, its strength fading as quickly as it had appeared, its body trembling before collapsing into the snow, breath shallow, fur dusted with frost, and something deeper than exhaustion, and Ethan dropped. Beside it, gloved hands brushing over its coat, feeling the steady but fragile rhythm beneath. And that was when he saw it, the harness, worn but unmistakable, the markings of a military canine, and something inside him tightened, not fear, not yet, but recognition, the kind that doesn't come from thought, but from memory etched too deep to forget. He looked back at the place the dog had dragged him to, the snow there slightly sunken, uneven, as if the earth itself had shifted beneath it, and even through the storm he could sense it now, a faint, almost impossible vibration, like something beneath the surface was still alive, still waiting. The dog let out a low sound then, not a whine, not pain, but something else, something older, and as its eyes flicked toward that same spot one last time before closing, Ethan realized this wasn't just a rescue. This was a message, and whatever was buried under that snow had been calling long before he ever set foot on this mountain. The storm did not ease when Ethan lifted the dog. It only deepened, as if the mountain itself had decided to test whether he truly meant to stay, and each step back toward the cabin felt heavier than the last, not just because of the dog's weight, but because of the quiet understanding settling into his chest that this moment was not random, that something had reached out and chosen him again. Even after all the years he had spent trying to disappear from anything that resembled purpose, his boots dragged through nearly knee-deep snow, the wind cutting sideways now, sharp enough to sting his eyes. But he kept his arms steady, holding the German shepherd close, feeling the faint rise and fall beneath its ribs, counting each breath the way he once counted seconds in places where silence meant survival. And when the outline of his cabin finally appeared through the white blur, small and stubborn against the endless cold, he felt something shift, not relief exactly, but a quiet determination, the kind that does not announce itself. It simply stays. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepped inside, and the world immediately changed. The wind fell away behind him, replaced by the low creak of wood and the faint scent of smoke from the fire he had left earlier, weak but alive. He set the dog down gently on a worn blanket near the hearth, hands moving with practiced care as he brushed away the snow from its coat, revealing patches of frost clinging to fur that had once been brushed and maintained with discipline. This was not a stray, not even close. This was a soldier, He could see it in the structure of the body, the harness, the way even in unconsciousness the dog's posture held a kind of order, a kind of training that did not fade easily. Ethan knelt beside him, removing his gloves, ignoring the cold that immediately bit into his fingers, and began checking for injuries. Nothing obvious that would explain the collapse, no visible wounds. But the exhaustion was deep, the kind that came from pushing far beyond limits, from refusing to stop when stopping meant failure. He exhaled slowly, then stood, moving across the small cabin with quiet efficiency, adding wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life until the flames rose higher, casting a warm, steady glow that softened the edges of the room, shadows shifting along the walls like memories that did not quite belong to the present. He returned with a metal bowl, filled it with water, and placed it near the dog's head, then wrapped another blanket over him, careful not to startle, not to rush, because something about this felt fragile, not just the dog, but the moment itself, like a thread that could break if handled without respect. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time and storms had a way of losing shape, and Ethan sat back against the wooden wall, watching, listening, the cabin settling around him, the fire crackling in low, steady bursts, and beneath it all, there it was again, faint but unmistakable, that same subtle vibration he had felt outside, not strong, not loud, but consistent, rhythmic, like something far below the surface was repeating a pattern that did not belong to wind or shifting snow. His eyes moved toward the door, then toward the direction of the forest beyond. The same direction the dog had been watching, and for a moment he considered ignoring it, letting it be just another strange thing in a world already full of things he could not explain. But then the dog stirred, just slightly, a small movement of the head, a breath that came deeper this time. And Ethan leaned forward, placing a steady hand along the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beginning to return. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. Not speaking to people anymore had made words feel heavier than they used to be. But the dog responded, not with movement, but with a subtle shift in awareness, as if it had heard him somewhere beyond sound. The amber eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening, locking onto Ethan with a clarity that made his chest tighten again. There was no confusion there, no fear, just recognition, and something else, something that felt almost like expectation. The dog did not try to stand, did not panic. It simply held that gaze, steady, deliberate, and then, as if remembering something more important than its own condition, it turned its head slightly toward the cabin door, ears twitching, body still weak, but intent unmistakable. Ethan followed the motion, his own senses sharpening now, the soldier in him rising, whether he wanted it to or not. And the vibration came again, faint, steady, repeating. He counted without thinking, 1, 2, 3, a pause. Then again, too consistent to be random, too controlled to be natural, and a memory brushed against the edge of his mind. Something buried deep, something from a different time when signals like that meant life or death. But it slipped away before he could fully grasp it. The dog let out a low sound then, not a growl, not a warning, but something closer. To a call, soft, insistent, as if urging him to understand what it already knew. Ethan looked back at the animal, at the worn harness, at the eyes that had not left him since they opened, and he felt it clearly now. This was not the end of the storm, not even close. This was the beginning of something he had not been ready to face. And somewhere beneath the frozen ground outside, whatever was sending that signal had just found its way back into his life. The fire had grown steady now, its warmth pressing gently against the walls of the cabin, but Ethan could not shake the feeling that something beyond those walls was still watching, still waiting, the rhythm beneath the ground continuing its quiet pulse like a signal that refused to be ignored. And he sat there for a long moment, one hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder, feeling the strength returning little by little, the rise and fall of breath no longer fragile but measured, controlled, the way a trained body recovers when given even the smallest chance. And yet the dog did not relax, not fully, its ears shifting at intervals, catching something far beyond the reach of human hearing, something that seemed to move through the earth itself rather than the air. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he listened, not with his ears, but with the memory of training that had never truly left him. Years ago, in a place far from snow and mountains, he had learned that not all signals were meant to be heard, some were meant to be felt. And this, whatever it was, followed a pattern too precise to dismiss. He found himself counting again without realizing it. Each pulse spaced evenly apart, steady as a heartbeat, steady as a machine designed to mimic life. And that thought lingered longer than he expected, because it carried with it a memory he had not allowed himself to revisit in years, a mission that had never fully closed, a location buried beneath classified lines and unanswered questions. He shook his head slightly, as if the motion could push the thought away, but the dog stirred again, more fully this time, its body shifting as it attempted to rise, and Ethan placed a steady hand against its side. "Not yet," he said quietly, though the dog's eyes remained fixed on the door, intent, focused, as if time itself was not something it could afford to waste. And then, slowly, with effort but determination, the German Shepherd pushed itself up, its legs unsteady for only a moment before finding balance. The kind of resilience that does not come from instinct alone, but from training, discipline, from having been asked to stand when standing was the only option. Ethan watched closely, recognizing it now without question. This was a working dog, a partner, not just in name, but in purpose. And as the dog took a step forward, then another, moving toward the door with quiet urgency, something inside Ethan shifted again, a part of him he had kept buried beneath routine and silence, a part that remembered what it meant to follow rather than question, to trust signals that logic could not yet explain. The dog paused at the door, turning its head slightly to look back at him, not pleading, not demanding, simply waiting, and that look carried more weight than words ever could. It was the look of a partner expecting you to understand your role, even if you had tried to forget it. Ethan exhaled slowly, pushing himself up from the floor, the warmth of the fire at his back now, the cold waiting on the other side of the door. And for a brief moment he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of recognition, because stepping outside again meant stepping back into something he had walked away from, something that had cost him more than he had ever spoken about. But the vibration came again, faint, steady, impossible to ignore, and the dog shifted its weight, ready despite the exhaustion that still lingered in its frame. And Ethan reached for his coat, pulling it on without breaking eye contact, then moved to the door, his hand resting on the handle as the wind pressed faintly against it. From the other side, a low, constant force, like the mountain itself breathing. He opened it slowly, and the cold rushed in immediately, sharp and alive, carrying with it the endless white of the storm, though it had softened slightly now, the snow falling in finer, quieter patterns, the world beyond still vast and unforgiving, but no longer chaotic, more controlled. As if something had shifted in its rhythm, the dog stepped out first, not rushing, not stumbling, but moving with a clear sense of direction, its nose lifting slightly, its ears angled forward, tracking something beneath the surface rather than above it. Ethan followed, pulling the door closed behind him, the cabin fading into the background as they moved away from it, step by step into the open expanse, the snow crunching beneath their boots and paws, the sound carrying farther now in the calmer air, and with each step the vibration grew just slightly stronger, not louder, but more defined, easier to feel through the ground, through the subtle shifts in balance, through the quiet tension in the air itself. They moved toward the same spot the dog had led him to before, the uneven patch of snow that now seemed more obvious, more deliberate, as if it had been disturbed from below rather than above. And when they reached it, the dog stopped again, lowering its head, placing one paw carefully against the surface, pressing down with just enough force to signal, not dig, not disrupt, but indicate. This is it. Ethan crouched beside it, brushing away the top layer of snow with his gloved hand, revealing a harder surface beneath, not rock, not frozen soil, something smoother, something shaped, and his breath slowed as recognition edged closer. He cleared more of it, the outline becoming clearer with each movement. A flat plane, partially buried, edges too straight to be natural, and then his fingers brushed against metal, cold even through the glove, but unmistakable, and the moment stretched, quiet and heavy, as the pieces began to align in his mind. The pattern, the signal, the dog, none of this had been random, none of it, and the realization did not come with shock, but with a quiet, steady certainty, the kind that settles deep and does not leave. He looked at the dog, whose gaze remained fixed on the spot, unwavering. And for the first time since the storm began, Ethan understood that whatever was buried beneath them had not only been waiting, it had been calling, and somehow, against all reason, it had found the one person who could answer. The metal beneath the snow did not belong to the mountain, and Ethan could feel that truth settle into his bones as clearly as the cold beneath his boots. His gloved hand brushing away more of the frost until the surface revealed itself fully, smooth, weathered, but intact, a rectangular plate embedded just beneath the earth as if it had been placed there with intention rather than lost to time. And for a moment he simply stared at it, the wind moving gently around him now, quieter than before, almost respectful, as if the storm itself understood this was not its moment anymore. The dog remained beside him, still and focused, its paw resting lightly near the edge of the metal, not pressing, not digging, only marking, and that small, deliberate restraint told Ethan more than anything else could. This was not something to uncover recklessly. This was something meant to be approached with care, with understanding. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, and reached forward again, clearing the remaining snow from the edges until the full outline appeared. A hatch, unmistakable now. Reinforced, built to endure time and pressure, its corners sharp beneath the frost, its surface marked by faint lines that hinted at seams. And then he saw it, barely visible beneath the ice that clung to it. A symbol, worn but still present, etched into the metal in a way that had not been erased by years or weather. His hand paused just above it, not touching, not yet, because something about that mark stirred a memory that had been buried deeper than anything beneath this mountain. A memory of maps that never left the table, of coordinates spoken only in quiet rooms, of operations that were never written down in full. And he felt his heartbeat shift, not faster, but heavier, each pulse carrying weight now. Meaning, the vibration beneath the ground aligned with it again, steady, measured, as if whatever was below was aware of his presence, aware that he had finally arrived. He sat back slightly on his heels, his gaze moving from the hatch to the dog, whose eyes remained locked on the same point, unwavering. And for a moment there was no need for words. The understanding passed between them in silence, the kind of silence that only exists between those who have worked together before, even if they had never met until this moment. Ethan swallowed slowly, his throat dry despite the cold, and then he reached out, this time letting his fingers rest against the metal, and the contact sent a faint, almost imperceptible sensation through his hand. Not warmth, not exactly, but a subtle hum, a resonance that matched the rhythm he had been feeling since the storm began. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing the sensation to settle, to confirm what he already suspected. This was not abandoned, not forgotten, not entirely. Something within it was still active, still functioning in a way that defied the years it had spent buried beneath snow and silence. He opened his eyes again, scanning the edges of the hatch, searching for any sign of an entry point, a handle, a mechanism, anything that would explain how it could be opened. But the surface remained smooth, uninterrupted except for that single symbol, and his mind moved quickly now, pulling fragments together, patterns, training, recognition. This was not designed to be accessed by anyone. It was designed to be accessed by someone specific, and the realization settled in slowly, deliberately, as if it did not want to startle him, but instead wanted him to accept it fully. The dog shifted slightly then, stepping closer, its nose hovering just above the symbol before letting out a low, steady breath that fogged the metal surface. And in that moment something changed, not in the hatch itself, but in the way Ethan saw it, because the breath revealed what the frost had hidden, faint lines forming a pattern around the symbol, almost invisible until now. And he leaned closer, brushing the surface again, this time more carefully, revealing a circular design etched into the metal, subtle, precise, the kind of detail that only revealed itself when approached with patience. And his chest tightened as recognition deepened. This was not just a hatch. This was a lock, not mechanical in the traditional sense, but something more specific, something that required alignment, timing, presence. He glanced again at the dog, whose posture had not changed, whose Focus had not wavered, and the thought came to him not as a question but as a quiet certainty. This was why the dog had found him, not by chance, not by instinct alone, but because something about him, something in his past, matched whatever this place required. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a different tone now, softer, almost distant, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting, just as the ground beneath them had been waiting, and Ethan realized then that this was no longer about the storm, or the mountain, or even the dog beside him. This was about something that had begun long before he chose to walk away from everything, something that had not forgotten him, even when he had tried to forget himself. He placed both hands on the metal now, steady, grounded, feeling the rhythm beneath it more clearly than before, and without fully understanding why, he adjusted his position, aligning himself with the symbol, with the pattern, with the quiet pull that had guided him here. And the moment stretched, silent and full, as if time itself had slowed to allow him to choose, to step forward or to turn back. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan did not hesitate the moment his hands settled fully against the metal. The world seemed to narrow into a single point of awareness. The cold air, the quiet wind, even the distant tree-line fading into something distant and secondary, as if the mountain itself had stepped back to let something older take its place. And Ethan did not move at first. He simply stayed there, feeling, listening, allowing the rhythm beneath the surface to guide him rather than question it. Each pulse rising through the metal and into his palms with a steady precision that felt almost familiar, not because he remembered it clearly, but because some part of him had always known it was there, waiting for the moment when he would be ready to recognize it again. And beside him the dog remained still, not tense, not anxious, but present, grounded, its breathing now strong and even, its eyes fixed not on the surroundings but on him, as if the next step belonged to him alone. And that understanding settled quietly into Ethan's chest. This was not something the dog could do for him. It could only lead him here. The rest required something only he carried, something that had not been left behind no matter how far he had tried to walk away from it. He adjusted his hands slightly, aligning them with the faint circular pattern etched into the metal, his fingers tracing the edges of the design with careful attention. And as he did, the vibration shifted, just slightly, not stronger, not louder, but more responsive, as if the surface beneath him had acknowledged the contact. And his breath slowed in response, his focus sharpening into that same clarity he had once relied on when everything depended on timing, on precision, on trust in signals that could not always be seen. The memory brushed closer now, no longer slipping away, but forming at the edges of recognition. A briefing room dimly lit, voices low and deliberate, a map marked with coordinates that never appeared on official records, and a phrase repeated more than once, not for emphasis, but for understanding. Access requires alignment, not force, and he felt something inside him settle into place, the hesitation that had lingered before dissolving into quiet certainty. He was not here by accident. None of this was. The dog's presence, the signal, the hatch, it had all converged with a purpose that was only now becoming clear, and he leaned forward slightly, pressing his palms more firmly against the metal, not pushing, not trying to open it, but matching its rhythm, allowing his own steady pulse to align with the pattern beneath. And for a moment nothing changed, the silence stretching around him, the wind brushing softly against his back, the snow falling in slow, delicate patterns that seemed almost suspended in time. And then, gradually, something shifted. The vibration deepened, not in intensity, but in tone, a subtle change that resonated differently through his hands, as if a second layer had been revealed beneath the first, and the circular pattern beneath his fingers responded, not visibly at first, but through sensation, a faint movement, almost imperceptible, like the turning of something long held in place. And Ethan held his position, resisting the instinct to react, to move too quickly, because this required patience, the same patience he had learned in moments where rushing meant losing everything. And beside him the dog exhaled slowly, its breath steady, calm, reinforcing the stillness of the moment. And then the change became undeniable, a soft click, not loud, not mechanical in the way he expected, but precise, final, and the metal beneath his hands shifted, just enough to confirm that something had been unlocked. His eyes opened wider, his focus sharpening as the edges of the hatch revealed a faint separation from the surrounding ground, a line forming where there had been none before, and he slowly lifted one hand, then the other, watching as the circular pattern settled into a new position, aligned in a way that had not existed moments earlier, and the silence that followed felt different now, not empty, but waiting, as if the next movement belonged to him again, and he reached forward, his fingers finding the edge of the hatch where the separation had formed, and this time when he applied pressure, the metal responded, not resisting, not locked, but ready. The surface lifting slightly beneath his grip, and a faint rush of colder air escaped. From beneath, carrying with it a scent that did not belong to the mountain, something older, enclosed, preserved, and Ethan paused, his hand still on the edge, his gaze shifting briefly to the dog, whose eyes remained steady, unwavering, as if confirming what he already felt, that whatever lay beneath was not a threat, but something meant to be found, something that had waited long enough, and with that understanding, he pulled, slowly, deliberately, the hatch rising inch by inch, revealing darkness below, not empty darkness, but depth, space, a hidden structure concealed beneath layers of time and snow. And as the opening widened, the faint vibration grew clearer, no longer filtered through the metal, but rising directly from below, steady, alive, and for the first time since the storm began. Ethan understood that he was no longer standing on the surface of something unknown. He was standing at the edge of it, and whatever waited beneath had just opened its door. The darkness beneath the hatch did not feel empty. It felt contained, like a space that had been holding its breath for years and had only just exhaled, and Ethan remained at the edge for a moment, his hand still gripping the cold metal as he looked down into the narrow opening. The faint vibration rising more clearly now, no longer filtered or distant but present, steady, and alive in a way that made the air around it feel different, heavier, as if the space below carried its own atmosphere separate from the mountain above. The dog stepped closer, its paws silent against the snow as it peered into the opening beside him, its ears angled forward, its body no longer weak but alert, engaged, and when it let out a quiet breath into the darkness, the sound did not disappear, it echoed softly, returning after a brief delay that told Ethan more than his eyes could. This went deeper than he expected, deeper than a simple storage chamber or forgotten shelter. This was built with intention, with structure. He shifted his position slightly, reaching down along the inner edge of the opening until his fingers found what he had hoped for, a series of narrow metal rungs embedded into the side, worn but solid, and he tested one carefully, applying just enough weight to confirm its strength. It held without hesitation, and he nodded to himself, a small, almost instinctive motion, before glancing once more at the dog, whose gaze remained fixed, downward, unwavering, as if whatever lay below was not just familiar, but known, and that thought lingered longer than it should have, because it carried a quiet implication that unsettled him more than the darkness ever could. He exhaled slowly, then swung one leg over the edge, lowering himself onto the first rung, the cold metal pressing through the sole of his boot as he shifted his weight fully, his hands gripping the sides as he began his descent, each movement deliberate, controlled, the way he had been trained to move in spaces where visibility could not be trusted, where sound carried differently, where every step mattered. The light from above followed him only a short distance, fading gradually as he moved deeper, replaced by a dim, ambient glow that seemed to come from somewhere below, not bright, not artificial in the usual sense, but steady enough to outline the walls around him. Smooth surfaces reinforced with material that had endured both time and pressure without significant decay, and the deeper he went, the clearer the pattern became. This was not abandoned, not neglected. This place had been sealed, preserved, designed to remain hidden yet functional. The vibration pulsed through the structure now, no longer subtle but integrated into the very framework around him, a steady rhythm that felt almost like a guide, marking time in a space where time itself felt suspended. He continued down for what felt like several yards, though distance became difficult to judge in the confined space, until finally his boots touched solid ground again, and he released his grip slowly, stepping back from the ladder to take in his surroundings. The room was larger than he expected, not expansive, but carefully constructed. Walls lined with panels that bore faint markings, equipment positioned with precision, not scattered, not abandoned, but left exactly as it had been, as if someone had intended to return but never did, or perhaps had returned in a way that did not require movement at all. The light in the room came from a series of narrow strips embedded along the edges of the ceiling, casting a soft, even glow that revealed details without overwhelming them. And the air was cooler here, but not freezing, controlled, stable, carrying a faint scent of metal and something else he could not immediately identify, something older, something that did not belong to decay but to preservation. He took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the space with careful attention, absorbing each detail, each placement, each sign that this was more than just a hidden bunker. This was a system. And then he heard it again, not through the ground this time, but through the air itself, the same rhythmic pulse, clearer. Now, originating from deeper within the structure, beyond the room he stood in, and as he turned his head toward the source, the dog appeared at the top of the ladder, silhouetted briefly against the light above before beginning its own descent, moving with surprising steadiness despite the exhaustion it had shown earlier, and when it reached the bottom, it did not hesitate. It moved past Ethan with quiet purpose, heading directly toward a narrow passage at the far end of the room, its path certain, its focus absolute, and Ethan watched it for a brief moment, the realization settling deeper with each second. This was not exploration, this was return, and without needing to question it further, he followed, stepping into the passage where the light dimmed slightly, the walls narrowing around him, the rhythmic pulse growing stronger with each step, until it no longer felt like something separate from him, but something he was moving toward, something that had been waiting long enough to be found. And as the dog slowed near the end of the corridor, stopping before a closed door that looked no different from the walls around it except for a single, faintly illuminated panel at its center, Ethan felt that same quiet certainty rise again, steady and undeniable. Whatever lay beyond that door was the reason he had been brought here, not just by the storm, not just by the dog, but by something that had never truly let him go. The door did not look like something meant to be opened by force. It looked like something meant to be recognized, and Ethan slowed his steps as he approached it, the faint glow at its center steady and calm, not warning, not inviting, simply waiting. The dog stood just inches from it, body aligned, ears forward, not tense but certain, as if it had arrived at a place it had always known existed, even if time had separated it from that knowledge. And Ethan felt that same quiet pull again, not urgency, not pressure, but alignment, the kind that does not demand action but makes it inevitable. He stopped beside the dog, his eyes moving over the surface of the door, tracing its edges, its seamless integration into the surrounding walls, until his focus settled on the panel, a small square no larger than his palm, emitting a soft, pale light that pulsed faintly in the same rhythm he had been following since the moment the storm began. And for a moment he did nothing. He simply stood there, listening, allowing the pattern to settle into him fully, because something about this required more than instinct. It required presence, the kind he had once carried without thinking, before the years had layered silence over it. The dog shifted slightly, its shoulder brushing lightly against his leg, not pushing, not urging, just there, and that small contact grounded him in a way he had not expected, reminding him that he was not alone in this moment, that whatever had brought them here had done so together. He exhaled slowly, then lifted his hand, hovering it just inches from the glowing panel, the warmth from it subtle but noticeable against the cold that still clung to his skin, and as his fingers moved closer, the light responded, not brighter, not flashing, but deepening, as if acknowledging the proximity, and his hand stopped just short of touching it. Hesitation not born from fear but from recognition, because this felt familiar in a way that did not belong to memory alone. It belonged to something deeper, something he had once trusted without question. And then the dog lowered its head slightly, its nose almost touching the panel, and let out a slow, steady breath that fogged the surface for just a second before fading. And in that moment Ethan understood, not as a thought, but as a certainty, this was not about access. It was about connection. He placed his hand against the panel, firm but not forceful, his palm aligning naturally with its surface. And for a heartbeat nothing happened, the silence stretching around them. The air still, the faint vibration holding steady beneath everything. And then the warmth increased, spreading from the point of contact through his hand and into his arm. Not painful, not overwhelming, but present, unmistakable. And the light shifted, the soft pulse becoming more defined, syncing with something deeper, something that felt less like a machine and more like a response. And Ethan's breath slowed, his focus narrowing, every sense attuned to the subtle changes unfolding in front of him. And then the panel emitted a low, almost inaudible tone, not mechanical in the usual sense, but harmonic, resonant, and the door responded, not with a sudden movement, but with a gradual separation, the surface splitting along lines that had been invisible moments before, sliding apart with a smooth, deliberate motion that revealed a space beyond, darker than the corridor, but not unlit, a softer glow emanating from within, carrying with it that same steady rhythm, now clearer than ever. And Ethan lowered his hand slowly, watching as the opening widened just enough to allow passage, the edges of the door settling into place with a quiet finality, and the air that moved through the gap felt different, warmer, carrying a faint scent that stirred something deep within him, something he could not immediately name but could not ignore. And the dog stepped forward without hesitation, crossing the threshold with calm certainty, its movements measured, purposeful, as if returning to a place it had never truly left. And Ethan remained where he was for just a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the space beyond, his mind quiet in a way it had not been in years, because the questions that would normally rise did not come, only understanding, only that same steady pull that had guided him since the beginning. And then he stepped forward, crossing into the room beyond, the light shifting around him as the space revealed itself slowly, walls lined with equipment more refined than the outer chamber, surfaces clean, preserved, untouched by the decay that time usually brings. And at the center of the room, elevated slightly above the floor, was a structure that drew his focus immediately, not large, not imposing, but precise, intentional. And as he took another step closer, the rhythm that had been guiding him since the storm began resolved into something unmistakable, not just a signal, not just a pulse, but a heartbeat, steady, patient, waiting. And for the first time since he had left everything behind, Ethan understood that this was not something he had found. This was something that had been waiting for him to return. The sound at the center of the room did not echo like a machine. It resonated like something alive, steady and patient, and Ethan slowed as he moved closer, each step measured, his boots making almost no sound against the smooth floor. The air here warmer than the corridor, carrying that same faint scent that lingered just beyond recognition, something clean, preserved, almost untouched by time. And the dog was already there, standing near the raised structure, its posture calm, its head slightly lowered as if acknowledging something rather than inspecting it. And that alone told Ethan more than any visible detail could. Because this was not curiosity, this was familiarity. He approached the structure carefully, his eyes adjusting to the softer light that seemed to emanate from it. Not bright, not harsh, but steady, revealing its shape in quiet layers. It was not a container in the usual sense, not a crate, not a storage unit, but something more deliberate, a chamber, sealed but not hidden, designed to hold something that mattered enough to be preserved without being forgotten. And the closer he came, the clearer the rhythm became, no longer just a sensation but a sound he could hear, low, consistent, spaced with precision that mirrored a heartbeat, not rushed, not fading, simply continuing as if time had no claim over it. He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the surface of the chamber, which was partially transparent, not fully clear but enough to reveal the outline within. And at first he could not fully understand what he was seeing, because the shape did not align with anything he expected. It was not equipment, not supplies, not something mechanical left behind. It was something else, something human, or at least human in its form. And his breath slowed as recognition began to form, not complete, not immediate, but undeniable. The chamber held a figure, still, preserved, not in a way that suggested loss, but in a way that suggested waiting. And the light within the structure pulsed gently, synchronized with the rhythm that filled the room, and Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding that had not yet fully surfaced. He took another step closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as details became clearer: the outline of a uniform, the structure of shoulders, the positioning of arms resting at the sides, and something deeper stirred. Within him, something that had been buried beneath years of distance and silence. A memory that did not come as an image but as a feeling, a presence that had once stood beside him in places where trust was the only thing that mattered. And the dog moved then, stepping closer to the chamber, its nose lifting slightly as it let out a soft breath against the surface, its tail low but steady, not uncertain, not anxious, simply present. And Ethan watched that small gesture with quiet intensity, because it confirmed what he had not yet allowed himself to fully accept. This was not just a discovery. This was a return. He raised his hand slowly, almost instinctively, stopping just short of touching the surface of the chamber, his reflection faintly visible against it, layered over the figure within, and the moment stretched, silent except for the steady rhythm that filled the space. And then something changed, not in the room, not in the structure, but in him. The memory aligned, not as a fragment, but as a whole. The briefing, the mission that had never been spoken about afterward, the name that had been left out of every official record, and his breath caught, just slightly, as the realization settled into place with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This was not someone unknown, not someone lost to time. This was someone he had known, someone he had stood beside when the world had narrowed into a single objective. And for a moment he could not move, because the weight of that understanding held him where he stood, the years between then and now collapsing into something immediate, something present. And the dog lowered its head slightly, its body still, its gaze shifting from the chamber to Ethan, as if acknowledging the connection that had just been uncovered. And in that silent exchange, everything became clear in a way that did not require explanation. The dog had not just found him. It had brought him here, to this place, to this moment, to this truth that had been waiting beneath the surface for longer than he had allowed himself to remember. And Ethan finally let his hand rest against the chamber, the surface cool but not cold, steady beneath his touch. And the rhythm continued, unchanged, as if it had been waiting for that contact, not to begin, but to be recognized. And he understood then, with a quiet certainty that settled deep within him, that whatever had been preserved here had not been left behind. It had been kept, protected, not for the world, but for him. And the realization did not bring answers, not yet, but it brought something else, something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of purpose that did not come from orders or missions, but from something far more personal, something that had found its way back to him when he had stopped looking for it. And as he stood there, hand resting against the chamber, the steady rhythm filling the space around him, he knew that this was only the beginning of what he had been brought here to uncover. The moment his hand rested against the chamber, the rhythm shifted, not faster, not louder, but deeper, as if it had acknowledged him in a way that could not be explained through logic alone. And Ethan felt it travel through his palm and into his chest, aligning with something within him that had been quiet for far too long. The steady pulse now unmistakable, no longer something separate from the figure inside, but something connected, sustained. And for a brief second, he wondered if what he was hearing was not just a signal, but a continuation, a life held in suspension rather than lost to time. And his breath slowed as the realization began to take shape. The figure inside the chamber was not preserved in the way memory preserved something. It was maintained, kept in a state that defied the passing of years, and the implications of that settled heavily in the silence around him. Because this was not a place built to remember, it was a place built to wait. The dog remained at his side, unmoving, its presence steady and grounding, its gaze shifting between Ethan and the chamber, as if monitoring both, as if ensuring that neither stepped away from what was unfolding. And Ethan's eyes moved slowly across the surface of the structure, taking in details he had not fully registered before, the faint lines along the edges, the subtle interface panels embedded seamlessly into the frame, the soft glow that pulsed in synchronization with the rhythm, all of it designed with precision, not excess. Nothing here was unnecessary, everything served a purpose. And as his focus deepened, something else came into view. A small display near the base of the chamber, dim at first, almost hidden, but active, and he crouched slightly, his hand trailing along the surface until he reached it, brushing away a thin layer of dust that had settled over time, revealing a screen that flickered gently, as if responding to his proximity. And the symbols that appeared were not unfamiliar, not entirely. They carried the same structure, the same language he had once trained to understand, though the context now felt different, distant, like a memory spoken in a voice he no longer fully recognized. He studied the display in silence, his mind working slowly, carefully, piecing together fragments that had been buried beneath years of distance. And then a single line resolved clearly enough to read, not in full clarity, but enough to understand its meaning. Status, sustained. And the words lingered in his mind longer than they should have, because they did not align with anything he had expected to find here. Sustained did not mean ended. It did not mean lost. It meant ongoing, and his chest tightened slightly as the weight of that word settled into place. He shifted his gaze back to the figure within the chamber, seeing it now not as something preserved from the past, but as something existing within the present in a way that challenged everything he thought he understood about time and survival. And the dog let out a quiet breath, its head lowering just slightly, a gesture that felt almost like recognition, not of the situation, but of the individual within, and that small detail was enough to confirm what Ethan had not yet spoken aloud, even in his own mind. This was not just someone he had known. This was someone the dog had known too, someone they had both stood beside in moments where trust had not been optional but essential, and the connection between them now felt less like coincidence and more like design, as if every step that had led them here had been part of something that had been set in motion long before the storm ever formed. Ethan rose slowly, his hand still resting lightly against the chamber, and he allowed himself a moment to simply stand there, to let the reality of what he was seeing settle without resistance, because rushing this, questioning it too quickly, would only pull him away from the understanding that was beginning to form. And the room around him remained steady, unchanged, the light soft, the air still, the rhythm constant, everything functioning exactly as it was meant to, as if this place had never stopped doing what it was built to do, even when the world above it had moved on. And he realized then that this was not about discovery in the way he had first assumed. This was about continuation, about something that had not ended when it should have, something that had been carried forward quietly, patiently, until the moment it could be brought back into the light. And as that thought settled, the display near the base of the chamber shifted again, the symbols adjusting, responding to his presence in a way that felt almost intentional, and a new line appeared. Clearer this time, more defined, awaiting authorization, and Ethan felt his breath catch just slightly, not from fear, but from recognition, because this was the part that belonged to him. Not the finding, not the following, but the decision, the moment where everything that had led him here required him to choose what came next. And he looked at the dog, whose gaze met his with the same steady clarity it had shown since the beginning, unwavering, certain, and in that quiet exchange, the weight of the moment did not feel like a burden. It felt like something he had been ready for long before he realized it. And as he turned back to the chamber, the steady rhythm continuing without pause, he understood that whatever happened next would not just change what was in front of him. It would change what came after, not just for him, but for everything that had been waiting beneath the surface to be seen again. The words on the display did not demand action, they waited for it. And Ethan stood there in that quiet space with the steady rhythm surrounding him, feeling the weight of the moment settle not on his shoulders, but somewhere deeper, somewhere that had not been touched in years, because this was not a decision he could make by instinct alone. This required something he had spent a long time avoiding. Trust, not in orders, not in command, but in himself, and the dog remained beside him, unmoving, its presence calm and certain, as if it had already accepted whatever choice he would make, as if it had known from the beginning that this moment would come. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze moving once more over the chamber, over the figure within, the uniform now clearer in the soft light, the details aligning with memories that had once been too heavy to hold on to. And he realized then that what stood in front of him was not just a preserved past. It was a responsibility carried forward, something that had been waiting not for anyone, but for him specifically, and the thought did not overwhelm him. It grounded him, because it gave shape to something that had felt empty for far too long. He stepped closer to the display again, lowering himself slightly so he could see it more clearly. The words still present, unchanged, awaiting authorization. And beneath them a faint interface had become more visible, subtle markings indicating a place for input, not mechanical buttons, not switches, but something more precise, something that required identity rather than force, and his hand hovered above it for a moment, not hesitating, but aligning, just as he had done with the hatch, allowing his movements to follow the quiet understanding that had guided him this far. And when his fingers made contact, the surface responded immediately, the light beneath his touch deepening, the symbols shifting into a pattern that moved with purpose rather than randomness, and the rhythm in the room changed again, not in speed, but in tone, rising slightly, as if acknowledging the next stage of something that had been in motion long before he arrived. Ethan kept his hand steady, his focus absolute, and then the display resolved into a new sequence, clearer than before, more direct, and a single line appeared, identity confirmed, and the words settled into the space with a quiet finality that left no room for doubt. This was meant for him, not by coincidence, not by chance, but by design, and the realization did not feel like a revelation. It felt like a return, like stepping back into something that had never truly ended. The dog shifted slightly, its posture relaxing just enough to reflect the change in the room. The subtle tension that had been present since the beginning easing into something calmer, more certain, and Ethan felt it too, the weight of uncertainty lifting, replaced by a clarity that did not need explanation. And then the chamber responded, the soft glow intensifying slightly, the rhythmic pulse becoming more pronounced, not louder, but closer, more immediate, and the surface that had remained sealed began to shift, not opening fully, but adjusting, the transparency increasing just enough to reveal more detail, and Ethan leaned in. Slightly, his breath steady, his eyes focused on the figure within, and for the first time he could see the face clearly, not distorted by reflection or shadow, but present, unchanged in a way that defied the years that had passed, and the recognition that followed was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if giving him the time to fully accept it, because this was not just someone he had known. This was someone he had trusted in moments where trust had been everything, someone whose absence had left a space that had never been filled, and now that space was no longer empty. It was here, in front of him, waiting, sustained, as the display had said, and Ethan felt something shift within him, something that had been locked away not out of choice, but out of necessity, because carrying it had once been too much, and now, standing in this place, it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like something that had been returned to him, something that had never truly been lost. The dog let out a quiet breath, stepping closer to the chamber once more, its head lowering slightly, and Ethan understood the gesture without needing to interpret it. This was not the end of the journey. This was the moment where it truly began, and as the steady rhythm continued, filling the room with its quiet, unwavering presence, Ethan knew that whatever came next would not be defined by what had happened before, but by what he chose to do now, and for the first time in a long time, that choice did not feel uncertain. It felt clear the face within the chamber did not belong to memory anymore. It belonged to the present, and Ethan stood there, unmoving, as the realization settled deeper than anything he had allowed himself to feel in years. Because this was not just recognition, this was restoration, the kind that does not ask permission before it takes hold. The steady rhythm filling the room now felt less like something external and more like something shared, as if whatever sustained the figure inside had reached beyond the chamber and into him, aligning with something he had long thought was gone. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with meaning that did not need to be spoken aloud. The dog stepped closer, its presence steady and grounded, its head lifting slightly as it looked at the figure within, and then back at Ethan, as if bridging the space between them. And in that quiet exchange, the years that had passed seemed to lose their weight, because what stood here now was not defined by absence. It was defined by continuation. Ethan drew a slow breath, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of the face inside the chamber, the calm stillness, the unchanged features that carried no sign of time. Having moved forward, and he felt a shift inside himself. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but certain, like a door opening quietly after being closed for far too long. He reached out again, his hand resting against the surface of the chamber with a steadiness that came from acceptance rather than hesitation, and the moment his palm made contact, the rhythm responded, deepening slightly, not changing its pace, but strengthening in a way that felt more present, more immediate, in the light within. The chamber adjusted, softening around the figure, revealing more detail, more clarity, and Ethan understood that this was not just a system responding to input. This was something designed to recognize connection, something that required more than identification. It required presence, and he allowed that presence to settle fully, no longer holding back, no longer distancing himself from what he was seeing. Because the truth of it was undeniable, this was someone he had left behind, not by choice, but by circumstance, someone whose absence had shaped the path he had taken afterward. And now that absence no longer existed in the same way, it had been replaced by something else, something that demanded more than memory. It demanded action. The display near the base of the chamber shifted again, the symbols reorganizing with a clarity that had not been there before. And Ethan's eyes moved to it without breaking his focus for long, reading the new line that had appeared, recovery, sequence available, and the words carried weight, not urgency, but possibility, and he felt his breath steady as he absorbed them. Because this was the moment where everything changed, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that forced itself upon him, but in a quiet, deliberate way that gave him the choice to move forward. The dog let out a soft breath, its posture relaxing further, its tail lowering slightly in a calm, steady motion that mirrored the shift in the room. And Ethan looked at it for a brief moment, seeing not just the animal that had led him here, but the partner it had been trained to be, the connection it shared with the figure inside, the silent understanding that extended beyond words or commands. And that understanding settled into him as well, because this was not something he had to face alone. It never had been. He turned his attention back to the display, his hand lifting from the chamber and moving toward the interface once more, not rushed, not uncertain, but aligned with the same quiet certainty that had guided him through every step since the storm. And when his fingers touched the surface again, the response was immediate, the light beneath them brightening slightly, the symbols shifting into a new configuration that reflected the change in status. And the rhythm in the room responded in kind, not accelerating, but deepening, as if preparing for something that had been waiting to begin. And Ethan felt it clearly now, the weight of what he was about to do, not as a burden, but as a responsibility that had found its way back to him, one that he no longer felt the need to avoid, because it was not about the past anymore. It was about what came next, and he held that understanding as he stood there, the steady pulse filling the space around him, the dog at his side, the figure within the chamber no longer just a memory but a presence. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel like he was standing at the end of something. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of something that had been waiting for him all along. The moment his fingers confirmed the sequence, the entire room responded, not with urgency, but with a quiet transition that felt almost ceremonial, as if something long prepared had finally been set into motion. The light within the chamber shifted again, deepening into a warmer tone, and the steady rhythm that had filled the space began to evolve, not accelerating, but changing in texture, becoming more layered, more complex, as if the simple pulse he had followed until now had only been the beginning of something far more intricate. Ethan kept his hand steady on the interface, his breath slow and controlled, his focus absolute, because every movement here mattered, every second carried weight, and the display beneath his touch adjusted once more, new lines forming with clarity that left no ambiguity. Recovery sequence initiated, and the words settled into the air like a quiet promise rather than a command. The dog stepped closer to the chamber, its posture calm but attentive, its eyes fixed on the figure within, and Ethan felt that same sense of alignment deepen, not just between him and the system, but between all three of them, as if they were no longer separate parts of a moment, but a single, connected presence within it. The chamber emitted a soft, sustained tone, not mechanical, not harsh, but resonant, almost harmonic, and the surface that had remained solid began to change, not opening yet, but adjusting. The transparency increasing gradually, revealing more detail, more clarity, the lines of the uniform, the stillness of the figure, the subtle rise and fall that had been hidden until now. And Ethan's breath caught just slightly as he realized what he was seeing. The rhythm was not sustaining something static. It was maintaining something active, something that had not ceased, and the implications of that settled deeply into his chest, because this was no longer about preserving the past. This was about restoring it. The air in the room shifted subtly, a faint current moving through the space as systems he could not fully see began to engage, the soft glow along the walls adjusting in response, and the temperature rose just enough to be noticeable, not uncomfortable, but controlled, intentional, the kind of change that signaled preparation rather than reaction. Ethan withdrew his hand slowly, not breaking his focus, his eyes remaining fixed on the chamber as the process continued without interruption. And the dog let out a quiet breath, its body relaxing further, its tail lowering in a calm, steady line that reflected a trust deeper than instinct, as if it recognized the sequence not as something new, but as something it had been waiting for. And Ethan understood that feeling now, because the uncertainty that had followed him since the beginning of the storm was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt both unfamiliar and completely natural at the same time. The chamber emitted another tone, slightly higher. This time, and the surface shifted again, a fine seam appearing along its edge, not forced, not sudden, but smooth, deliberate, as if the structure itself was responding to a signal that had always been part of its design. And the rhythm within the room adjusted once more, not faster, but fuller, carrying a presence that filled the space in a way that could not be ignored, and Ethan felt it in his chest, in his breath, in the quiet space between thoughts. This was not just a process, this was a return. The display updated again, the symbols aligning into a final sequence that held steady for several seconds before resolving into a single line. Stabilization complete. And the words carried a quiet finality that did not end the moment, but transformed it, and the chamber responded in kind, the seam widening just enough to suggest movement, not fully open, but no longer sealed. And a faint release of air escaped from within, warmer than the room, carrying with it that same subtle scent that had lingered at the edges of recognition, now clearer, now undeniable, something familiar, something that belonged not to the place, but to the person within it. And Ethan stepped closer without thinking, drawn not by curiosity, but by connection, his eyes steady, his posture grounded, as the final stage of the sequence unfolded in front of him, and the dog moved with him, staying just at his side, its presence unwavering, its gaze fixed forward, and in that moment there was no separation. Between them, no uncertainty, no hesitation, only the quiet understanding that whatever came next was not something to be feared, but something to be received. And as the chamber continued its slow, deliberate transition, the steady rhythm that had guided him from the very beginning did not fade. It remained, constant, present, but now it no longer felt like something he was following. It felt like something he was part of, something that had been waiting not just for discovery, but for this exact moment to finally begin. The final movement of the chamber did not happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if it understood the weight of the moment it was revealing, the seam widening inch by inch until the surface separated enough to allow the air inside to fully meet the air of the room. And Ethan stood there without stepping back, without hesitation, his breath steady, his eyes fixed on the space opening before him. Because whatever had been preserved here was no longer hidden, it was returning. The warmth that escaped from within carried a presence that was no longer distant or abstract. It was real, immediate, and as the chamber completed its transition, the interior became fully visible, no longer filtered, no longer obscured, and the figure within was no longer just an outline. Behind a barrier, it was there, present, unchanged in a way that felt both impossible and undeniable. And for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath along with him. The steady rhythm that had guided everything now clear, strong, filling the space with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. The dog stepped forward first, not rushing, not breaking the stillness. but moving with a calm that spoke of recognition deeper than memory, its head lowering slightly as it approached the open chamber, and when it stopped at the edge, it did not hesitate. It simply remained there, steady, present, as if welcoming something back rather than discovering it for the first time, and Ethan followed, each step measured, grounded, his focus unwavering as he moved closer, until he stood just a few feet away, close enough to see every detail clearly, the rise and fall of breath now visible, subtle but unmistakable, the faint movement that confirmed what the display had already told him. This was not preservation. This was continuation, and the weight of that truth settled into him with a clarity that did not overwhelm. It anchored, because it gave meaning to everything that had led him here, every step through the storm, every signal he had followed without fully understanding why, every moment that had felt like coincidence now aligning into something intentional, something precise. He stood there for a long moment, allowing the reality of it to settle without resistance, because this was not something that needed to be rushed. This was something that had already waited long enough. And then, slowly, the figure within the chamber responded, not with sudden movement, not with anything that would break the calm of the moment, but with a subtle shift, a breath drawn slightly deeper than before, a quiet indication that the process was complete, and Ethan felt it immediately, the change. In the rhythm, not faster, not louder, but fuller, as if the steady pulse that had filled the room was no longer maintaining something. It was sustaining something that had returned fully to itself, and the dog lifted its head slightly, its ears forward, its posture calm but alert, its gaze fixed on the figure with a quiet intensity that spoke of recognition and connection that had never truly been broken. And Ethan felt that connection as well, not as a memory, but as something present, something real, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding that did not require words, because some things did not need to be explained, they only needed to be recognized. He took one final step closer, stopping at the edge of the chamber, his posture steady, his presence grounded, and for the first time since this began, he allowed himself to fully accept what was in front of him, not question it, not analyze it, but accept it, because the truth of it was no longer something that could be doubted. And as he stood there, the room around him remained calm, the systems quiet, the light steady, everything functioning exactly as it was meant to, as if this moment had been the purpose all along. And in that stillness, Ethan understood something that had not been clear before. This was not just about bringing something back. This was about restoring something that had been incomplete, something that had been waiting for the right moment, the right person, to make it whole again. And as the steady rhythm continued, now fully integrated into the space rather than hidden within it, he realized that the storm above, the mountain, the years that had passed, none of it had been separate from this. It had all been part of the same path, the same quiet design that had led him here, and the understanding did not feel overwhelming. It felt simple, clear, the kind of truth that does not need to be explained to be known. And as he stood there beside the dog, both of them facing what had been returned, Ethan felt something settle into place within himself, something that had been missing not because it was gone, but because it had been waiting, and now that it had found its way back, there was no longer a question of what came next, only the quiet certainty that whatever it was, he would not face it alone. And in that stillness, with the steady rhythm filling the space around them, it became clear that this was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of one that had been waiting to be told all along.